Hello, everybody. Hello, YouTube, and welcome to SEAL Team 7, episode Cait Sith. I'm extremely honored to have a prestigious guest today, because who better to talk about Cait Sith than Cait Sith himself? We have Paul Tinto here today.
Hello. Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
Now, obviously, Paul, you are an actor, and there's more to you than just Cait Sith. Why don't you just give us a little quick rundown on you, and who you are and what you do?
Who I am and what I do. Oh boy. So yeah, I'm delighted that I can call myself an actor, and have been for the last 10, 13 years. I grew up on a small island off the west coast of Scotland. I live in Glasgow now, but I grew up on a small island called Arran off the west coast of Scotland from I was born up to 18, and then went to drama school in London. And then I've been lucky that I've had a really varied career with theatre, TV, film, and then latterly, only in the last few years, did I start to get into voice acting, voiceover acting. And weirdly, it happened. I lived in London for years, but it was bizarrely when I moved back up to Scotland, I decided as much as I love London, I kind of wanted a different change in pace of life. And the pandemic kicked in. I think every actor under the sun went and got themselves a duvet and a microphone, thinking, right. And I'd started doing voiceovers before that, but I just hadn't had any luck with them. And it was only the very just as the pandemic was coming in, I booked my first voiceover gig. And then I moved from an agent in London to a voiceover agent in Scotland who has been an absolute godsend for me. And she actually was a gamer. She is a gamer as well, and so I think she had sort of really hustled to try and kind of get her clients sort of like into this market a bit. And then Cait Sith kind of landed my way. He's my first ever voice character.
Really?
So I was kind of sort of properly into the deep end. Didn't know it. I don't think I did, to be honest. But I never played a character on. I don't think on radio. No, I'd done adverts, I'd done commercials, and I'd done the odd kind of tiny little bit for podcasts, just like filling in for random character voices in podcasts, but never done a character before, and definitely not a gaming character. And so Cait Sith was and has been the opening of a brand new world for me in quite an incredible fashion.
I mean, I know that, I know, for instance, that the way with voice acting, a lot of times you have no idea what voice actors have actually done because of the way that roles are tabulated, and a lot of time you're just in studios providing audio for things that you don't even know what it's going to. But skip that step and then go into a pretty substantial role. Because Cait Sith has a fair bit of dialogue. I mean, this game has a fair bit of dialogue. This is a dialogue-heavy game. Most people that have platinumed the game, meaning that they've gotten every single trophy available, have not heard all of the dialogue. It is an immense game.
And to be honest, I didn't. When I went. And it wasn't. I didn't. When the character came to me, it wasn't like someone had come asking for me. It was a cattle call edition that you were sort of agent sent one out saying, if anyone's interested, here is this. And it did say Final Fantasy on the email. I know that I've chatted to a few of the actors who it was very much veiled and coded what they were going up for. By the time it came to me, I knew it was auditioning for Final Fantasy. I knew all Final Fantasy. I knew Final Fantasy. I didn't play it when I was a kid. I played some PlayStation games, but Final Fantasy wasn't one of them. And I deliberately I remember thinking for the audition, it was send your tapes in sort of thing, and they'd given you specific instructions of what to aim for. It wasn't just let's hear your Cait Sith take. They had given us recordings of the Japanese, and they had given us recordings, a few clips from Dirge of Cerberus to listen to, and they were specific, and they wanted to stay within that kind of area and box in terms of tone, style. You know, they knew they wanted to keep him in that sort of heightened fashion. So I was already working within a framework to an extent, but I deliberately didn't go and start researching too much about the character, because I knew the first thing that would happen is I'd probably come across a dozen Reddit threads of everyone's opinion, and it wouldn't have been helpful. So, long way of saying, when I did end up getting the job after a callback and tuning in with a couple of the with the localization team and a couple of the producers, I didn't know how heavily he was going to feature in the game. And when I turned up for day one, I thought I was just going to be recording for 4 weeks, you know, and I thought, cool, yeah, great, and nice little small character. Then it kept coming back and back and back, and about a year and a quarter later, I'm still recording this thing, and I kept my NDA strict. They'd asked me, look, there's other people that have recorded these voices, and so we're asking people not to say anything or do anything on social media until they've been announced, and so I took that very seriously until about 8 months in, when I was still recording this game, and I asked a cousin who I knew that played the game, and I said, look, you need to keep this conversation to yourself, I need to ask you something. and then when I told him I was playing Cait Sith, his eyes just sort of just became about twice the size. It suddenly dawned on him that he was talking about, his cousin was voicing Cait Sith, and then he kind of brought me up to speed with the fact that everyone's going to know who this character is, mate, and that's going to be a big deal. And that's when the imposter syndrome set in.
Yeah, there's I don't deserve this. Yeah.
Yeah.
So okay, now that you've done this role, and I know that you've spent a lot of time with our good friend MJ Gallagher, how do you feel overall about the characterization of Cait Sith in Rebirth?
It's, delighted. First of all, I'm delighted about, I think he seems to have been received really, really well from at least from what I can gather. I've had some lovely feedback on social media. I've chatted to some of the people at Square and people involved in the game, and he seems to have been met with a lot of love, which is a massive relief. Because the one thing I did know eventually, sort of once I sort of started to look at the character a bit while I was recording, is how divisive he was and continues to be, I'm sure, and that's fine.
No,
but
I don't think he is. I think I have never seen a fandom 180 this hard. So the point I'm bringing up is, I don't think the Cait Sith defenders before Rebirth did not exist. Now there are no Cait Sith offenders. Everybody, I have never seen a turnaround. This was an MVP turnaround. Yeah. Yeah.
There's been some lovely messages that came my way on Twitter from people saying, look, I will happily admit that he was my least favorite character in the game. And I've go so far as to say I absolutely hated the character, and now I'm blah blah blah, but he's, and then gone on to say that there's been a huge turnaround and been really kind and thanked me, which I often will end up saying, it's very kind, but the thanks has to go out to so many people. There were so many people behind the development of this.
100%.
We were off we were. It was before the game came out. It was even when people had started to see clips in the trailers, and people were already getting a bit more intrigued and maybe had their hopes up that they weren't going to hate the character as much as they did. Obviously, there was still the whole the whole name pronunciation
I'd like to
explosion that
get
we
your
had to
take
go
on
through.
that. I'd like to get
I'm
your take
sure
on
we'll
that.
get into it. But to come back to your question, I'm really happy that there has been such an amazing reception, and for so many reasons. I think people have responded to him for so many reasons. There have been people that did, for whatever reason, like the character before, and he seems to have evolved in a way which fitted their imagination, which is great.
Yeah.
And a shout out to the developers and the teams. When I was recording, they had really, when I was looking at the dialogue each time, I was surprised by some of the like accurate sort of Scottish phrases and stuff. Not completely cliched Scottish phrases, but some of the, just a few random phrases here and there where I thought, where did you pick that up from? And they allowed me to collab. Yeah. And so it was amazing. I don't know, they really did their work. They really. It became very clear very early on that they wanted to honour the character in a way that wasn't entirely cliched. Now, there was something I was always conscious of, because I knew that he was a comic character, and Scottish comic characters tend to have it's very easy to slip into something that's cliched and something we've all heard before, and suddenly you're the Scottish comedy character that every Scottish gamer would just be hanging their head at and going, fuck, not again. And so that was always the thing that I was sort of always wanting to try and stay on the right side of for Scottish gamers more than anything, because I think it's meant a lot for the Scottish gaming community to have a Scottish character represented by a Scottish accent, and for a huge global game to sort of like take the culture seriously and or want to try and get it right. So it was great going through it, and I had an amazing time recording it, partly because they were allowing me to sort of collaborate on phrases, and I was seeing details that I would never have expected anyone to sort of put down in a script. So all that to say, because it's been well received, it's been a sigh of relief for me, definitely. But I always hoped so, because I had a lot of fun recording the character, and I think the character's got a lot to give now, and he seems to add a lot to the game, I think, from what people seem to say.
So one thing that I remember discourse around right after Remake came out, Cait Sith appeared visually there, but we didn't hear Cait Sith. And again, spoilers, a lot of people were concerned that Cait Sith would be a voiced accent by John Root, who voices Reeve. I thought the choosing a Scottish actor to represent Cait Sith was really a solid move overall.
I mean, it's come to my attention that they did. I don't know if they went straight to Scotland. In fact, I know they didn't, because I bumped into I was out in America with my wife, and we were chatting to an actor, an American actor, and he was a gamer, and my wife introduced me and said I was in Final Fantasy. He was like, "Oh my god, who?" And I said, "Cait Sith," and he was like, "I auditioned for Cait Sith."
Oh,
I was
man.
like, "Oh." I was like, "Okay." So they went around the houses in the States before they came to Scotland, perhaps. I don't know, but I did find it funny, out of all of the characters that I thought he was going to say that he auditioned for, and I think he auditioned for a few, but Cait Sith was one of them. I was like, huh, interesting. Even he seemed relieved that he didn't have to do a Scottish accent.
I can imagine. Yeah. Speaking of Scotland, so when Advent Children came out, it was the first time we actually heard Cait Sith localized and voiced. And so a lot of people were surprised that he even had a Scottish accent. Because from a completely face down look at Final Fantasy VII, we just know that Reeve controls this robot cat, and so why it was Scottish ended up being like a really kind of sophisticated lore nod. And just a little backstory for the audience. Essentially, it was referencing two bits of lore. One, the Cait Sith is at she is a Gaelic mythological figure, and so culturally there was a connection, but that he had a different accent than Reeve was important too, because in Japanese, Reeve's parents had a different dialect than him too, and we find out that it's sort of considered in Japanese. It's something a little bit more akin to like a crudish tongue, like something akin to like Cockney, So you would would hear you would hear all of a sudden like a Cockney element of his vocals coming out. And it's because he presented himself as in this way that would allow him to fit into the corporate world, but his true roots and the people he really cares for, they're on the streets, they're on the slums. And so they kind of mix the fact that he has a different natural dialect, like Reeve has a different native or natural dialect, like who he really is as a person, is his parentage. And so they factored that in, and it was jarring, I think, for a lot of the audience, and I think a lot of the overall response too, because there was so little context given, in Advent Children, because it's a very brief, short movie. Was that it was sort of caricaturized, and I think once we got to Dirge, there was a little bit more context and a little bit more like, okay, I guess that's just what it is. But I do recall like discourse around it being like, oh, that's so corny, or that's so tacky. I haven't heard anybody refer to, this take on Rebirth's Cait Sith, refer to it as tacky or corny. And again, I don't think that's necessarily I don't think it's the fault of any of the localization of the other games too, but it's a context thing. We now have all this context that's in Rebirth that allows you to it allows the character to really breathe the pretty intense moral complexity that Reeve, and by extension Cait Sith, are experiencing in this role. And so one of the most fascinating things about the character for me is that really you have this corporate face, Reeve, but then you have a majority of the player's experience on what his true character is communicated through this, sort of like core childhood version of himself, that's the real him. And so we get this really interesting look at this character.
And just to follow on to something you said there, I think that, there are loads of questions. There are loads of questions around the character, but weirdly, I think it's, and still, even if you were to never really be explained why he has a Scottish accent, even if that was just to be left completely unbeknown to you, I think there is something in not all of these answers being said that actually adds to it. At the end of the day, there's, even if you want to get all the way deep into the weeds of inspire logic or whatever, there's still there's still questions. There's questions there, and I think that's one of the strengths of Final Fantasy as a whole, is that for all that there's such in-depth folklore and knowledge and lots of stuff to be gained, there are still some things that I think you just have to make your own decision on and leave your imagination to, which allows the world to breathe, I think, as far as I'm concerned.
100%, yeah. And if you generate all this subtext in this really well-built world, and then you put honest and organic feeling life into the characters, like you said, it really it makes the player feel like they're a character amongst these real people. And absolutely one of those rare experiences where you get to feel the humanity coming out of a talking robot cat. It's
So-
really it's hard. So I'm listening to you now, and
sure.
having heard you talk, it's clear that did you do definitely put some work into characterization when you're getting into the role. What kind of mindset would you say you got into before you embodied?
Oh boy, Kate, it was a weird one because I don't think I approached it. I approached this job very differently, I think, from the way I would approach most jobs, bizarrely. And in that, I deliberately, I deliberately didn't go digging for everything I could find on him, which may sound counterintuitive as from an acting point of view, but there was part of me that I didn't want my imposter syndrome to get the better of me, and I
Mm-hmm.
knew the game was big, and I knew that it's just as soon as I hit his name, I wouldn't be able to stick to one website, and I would start to find 100 different opinions, and then suddenly I'm trying to please 100 different people, and I'd gone in with Kirk, the director. I had never met him at this point. This was all over Cannes, because I wasn't recording in LA, and with Ryan and Ben, the localizers, the script editors, the translators that I was working with, that played a big part in writing the dialogue, the translation dialogue, and I tried some stuff in the callback, and they seemed to sort of, they had given me the job, so I knew, all right, this is the energy that I gave them. This is what they're looking for, and we're going to work on that, and that's grand. But I thought, you know what, I'm just going to trust the conversations that I have in the booth. I'm going to trust the direction we have to go in. If they want to pull it back, we'll do that in the room. I mean, apart from anything else, you didn't really, although you could look at the story, I didn't know like how much of that story they were going to use. I didn't know what was going to be recorded day in, day out. So you're coming in blind to a lot of it. But
Mm-hmm.
the other reason I decided I wasn't going to look in too much of it is because Kate's a bit of a weird one in terms of a character, where he comes in out of nowhere and has no real relationship to any of the other characters. It's not, he doesn't necessarily know any of the backgrounds of these characters, and um, he, looking at it from the perspective of being controlled by Reeve, I knew that for a massive chunk of this game he was designed to have to sort of infiltrate this team, and he has to befriend
Mm-hmm.
everyone. So there isn't it's not even that useful to think two head along down the line and thinking that he's got any sort of ulterior motive here. He's a very present character.
Mm-hmm.
You could see that as, we can get into the discussion of how much sentience he has, how much of a soul like he has or whatever. I would kind of like to believe he does, because I think it's a more interesting choice to play. How that comes to be is another discussion, but he's so he's so present, and he's not necessarily got the same agenda as the likes of Barrett Cloud. He's not got the same backstories as them. Even to think about backstory, I think, is not necessarily a helpful thing, because whether he regenerates or whether he's being operated by Reeve, it just didn't really help in terms of performance. And I think what was more useful in the booth was actually just looking at the lines and really just sort of like going at it in that moment there, and kind of leaving kind of a lot of context outside the door. And I would give different takes and see what seemed to fit the mood, and try different things. And sometimes they'd be like, oh yeah, maybe let's go with take B, that seemed to have more of a bite to it, maybe that's more interesting. So I would try and give as many options as possible, but because he's a very erratic character.
Sure. Yeah.
He's even in his makeup is something of luck, of chaos, of chance,
Mm-hmm.
of he kind of seems to, there's a part of him that does seem to embody the randomness of life.
Yeah.
So within thinking about it in that sort of context, you think, well, maybe it's not actually that helpful to sort of look too far ahead of what his agenda is as a character or what he kind of wants, because he is kind of, I mean, he shuts down at times. For God's sake, we see that very clearly in Rebirth. There's just sometimes where he completely zones out and he wakes back up and he's like, all right,
Yeah. Yep. I'm back. I'm back. I'm back doing Shinra crime.
Doing Shinra crime, yeah.
I think the context would have maybe been a little bit of a detriment to, because the Re trilogy has somewhat significantly recontextualized the character. There's I think they've taken out some of the black and white elements of Reeve / Cait Sith's characterization. I know you're probably familiar now thanks to MJ, but in the OG, for instance, there was Reeve was essentially complicit in like holding Barrett's daughter captive, and it's
exactly.
And so this is there's like this much more organic and analog quality to the character, and so since they're sort of making the characters sympathetic elements come more gradually, that's different than it was in the OG, and so that's different than Reddit would have informed you how to treat the character. And so I think it's one of the benefits of having really good directors too. And nobody's walking away from remake or rebirth saying, this could have used with better voice direction. These are absolute apex studios, and you mentioned Ben and Ryan and people that I've met, and they're just top talents. Localization was really top notch too, and
incredible, absolutely incredible. But you're right. I don't think it would have. I don't think it would have. It wouldn't have served. I don't think it would have add or given me anything more useful in terms of playing it day in, day out, to sort of have too much context. And also, he has to, for the first chunk of that game, he has to come across as just someone who the team can trust, or at least have their own opinion to. And if he comes across in any way as if he's sort of scheming, then it's useless. And for anyone that didn't know that was coming, when he sort of goes and helps the Turks, then I think that should come out of nowhere. But also, I think wherever they want to take him in part 3, I feel like now at least he's got somewhere to grow, and I think there are other aspects and dynamics of his character and his emotional journey that I think I have no idea where they're going to take him, but I think there is, now that the team know more about him and he's sort of solidified his place, whether that's Reeve or whether that's Cait, I think he's got room to develop. There's more interesting aspects that I think are available to happen in the character in 3. At least that's what I'd hope.
Me too. It's one of the things I'm looking forward to most about part 3 is, the game does really good at, the OG did this well, but now that we have this, expansive palette to paint these factions in these really kind of nuanced and realistic lights. What Cait Sith always was, Ketchi always was a opportunity for us to see that within any corporate structure, even if that corporation, or let's say it's a oligarchy, any kind of monolithic structure in a society, that maybe does net bad for the planet, it's very often comprised of people doing their best, and good people, and that looks really different, based on which faction you're in, what you've grown up in, Reeve grew up in kind of poverty and was given opportunities as he was, because he had, this early opportunity to, like, I don't know, he could control reactors and stuff with his mind. You don't have to worry about that stuff too much, but like, he got this opportunity and now he's within this company, and he's and if you look deep in the lore, all of the stuff that helps people, like legitimately helps people, that's his division. He does all the stuff that helps people. Like, he really genuinely, you can tell there was a part of him that was a believer, and so to see him kind of toe the line and be like, hey, I still ultimately believe in good and want to do the right thing when possible. I am within this system and I feel like I can probably do the most good here. And I think a good opportunity, like where we see that, is when he changes the faces of the characters. And that's something that, like, it gets sent to people that would stand in his way, and like he kind of he sort of short circuits the Palmer, for instance, from being able to be super disruptive to the party too, because it's clear he has these really strong moral convictions, but he is where he is. He has to make all these very complex value judgments, and just the dialogue choices that Cait Sith has somehow conveys all of that through, like, a cartoon cat. It's really it's pretty intense. It's a pretty sophisticated performance.
It's interesting because there was times definitely when, I mean, he plays. There's a lot of his dialogue and his character is kind of up here, and it's and quite he's often the comedic relief, or he's often an energy which is very contrasting to other characters, and there's part of me sometimes that would be tempted to try and sort of bring him down into a more serious place, but he did always have to remember that whereas usually when you're looking at the conflict of a character and you've got all these different facets and they're happening within the one being, I sometimes had to keep in mind that the other aspects of Cait are going to be coming out, but they're coming out through Reeve. So they're not, Cait's purpose is not necessarily to serve all and every of Reeve's emotions. Now, that's not to say that Cait is perhaps a complete puppet in terms of his emotional capacity, but it was. I mean, I had no idea what scenes they were going to do with Reeve, so you kind of just sort of have to trust that part of the story is going to come out somewhere else. I mean, all of the characters deal with their own conflict in certain ways, and it all manifests itself in a different way. Barrett's sense of conflict and what he's dealing with is very, very different from all of the others. But it's when I would watch back some of the conversations of people talking about Cait from the original game, and they'd be like, what the fuck is this stupid annoying cat in my party and stuff, which is completely valid. But I think within the thematic structure of the game, he does serve a really, really interesting aspect of the nature of conflict and the nature of opposites. I mean, I think that's one of the, like, if someone was to say what is the what's Cait Sith all about, I would say he's the rule of opposites. For if one thing exists, then the other has to exist too, and nowhere more is that, I think, evident than in Cait and the way that he the actions that he has, or what he ends up setting up for others. Essentially, you could look into all of his fortunes, and the fortunes exist because there is an opposing force to them as well at the end of the day. And I remember when you were chatting to MJ and you were talking about this, you dipped into a bit of the thoughts of Jungian psychology and stuff like that, and I think there's an aspect of Cait that falls into that, where he is a chunk of the self, and Reeve is another chunk of the self, and kind of put them all together, and you're seeing the erratic nature of life. And I think it is erratic, and as I said before, I think he represents something that is perhaps chaos, and chance and choice and the law of opposites.
That's tremendously insightful, because I mean, Final Fantasy VII, to me, I mean, everybody's going to extract their own meaning from a story and what they value, but I think the thing that really resonated with me early on with Final Fantasy VII was about the identity, and the devs themselves have sort of said that that's what the game's actually about. Like, where it all culminates is when Cloud kind of understands who he is in part 3, and so I don't know why I haven't really thought of Cait as just another way that theme is severely represented. It's like it's a whole self. Like, what comprises a whole being? What comprises a whole self? And the really interesting, like you said, it's like this internal conflict that's turned into this, this kind of painting of opposites that we get to see what comprises a person, and like kind of in the like the overlapping concentric circles, like the stuff in the middle is really the core of him, and you see, when you see Reeve and Cait Sith behaving the same way, that's when you kind of know that's the core. That's the core of him.
I mean, I don't. Maybe even in first playthrough, it wouldn't. That's not necessarily something you're meant to get, because if you were experiencing the story from first time round, you wouldn't know that there's necessarily another part of Cait Sith that is in Reeve. So it's only once you join those two up that would maybe become something that's more to be thought of. For a lot of the time, he is just this. He can come across as this thing that even Barrett's like, what the fuck is this cat? Where do we pick this guy up from? And who is he? And why is he here? And why is he annoying? Or why is he this? Why is he that? And I think those are all completely valid questions. And from a plot point of view, that has to be the case, because he's got his role to serve within the plot, which is being a spy, which is actually working for another entity, and he's still there in that capacity. And so I think all of those, but all that gets turned around when he gets put into the context of another character, i.e. Reeve, and you see Reeve changing, and even Reeve's, I think, lens alters through watching through the eyes of Cait, watching the party. And that's evident in the original game, when you see that dialogue of him asking, I don't understand your life, when that dialogue that comes out of Gold Saucer. And I'm sure, Reeve's a fascinating character. I think you could make an entire story, a film book, purely out of the conflict, as you said, of someone that has a moral compass and has gotten trapped within a system, where he wants to try and serve and do the right thing, but he's up against the forces of a leadership that are more out for greed than anything else. And I think, I would love to see the scene where Reeve comes up with the idea, just like, I know, I've got it. I'm going to make this robot cat. It's gonna, the notion of how he comes to sort of develop Cait from like his original idea of, I'm going to make this robot cat that he's going to carry a megaphone, he's going to sit with this crown, he's got a Scottish accent, and he's, it was like, what the hell was he smoking that day? But he's the notion of Reeve's conflicting moral compass, and then, as you said before, choosing the fact that his character comes through in quite a childlike way, as if there's a part of him which is, if there was ever still just a part of innocence that is still within Reeve from his childhood, or from an innocence of what we believe in before we're poisoned with corruption, before we're too infected with the realities of life. A lot of that comes through Cait in the presence of this happy-go-lucky, you know, yeah, let's go over here, guys, let's go, boom,
Yeah,
you know.
absolutely. You brought up Barrett, and we talked
Yeah.
a little bit before the stream about this, but I went through and oh, Tyler's in chat.
Hello, Tyler. Sorry I've not got your picture up on the wall. My apologies.
So I was surprised because you know, I did my best to listen to literally every bit of Cait Sith's dialogue leading up to this you know, interview, and so much of it is banter and really back and forth feeling dialogue. So to the point where at one point, like, Barrett like mocks your voice, and so I was really surprised to find that you didn't record this with anybody else. You were just all on your lonesome in Scotland, well, under the duvet, you know, just doing it yourself. So that's really interesting. I want to know what that's like. So I'm assuming you get, you know, some kind of one, it's an indication that there's like really good voice direction, like, hey, you're gonna have this dialogue, but it sounded so natural the way that you would converse with other characters. Do you have any like do you have any experiences where they gave you some bit of you got some bit of feedback that kind of changed the way that you completely thought about the character, or completely changed the way that you kind of conceptualized how you were going to perform moving forward? Like any standout moments?
Yeah, there was a couple. I think the one moment I remember always really liking recording was the moment when he, just after he's given after he's, well, I've forgotten all of the terminology from the game. When he gives the thingamabob back to the Turks.
Yeah, no, that's it.
Oh my god,
nailed it in one. The thingamabob.
Thanks very much. It's like, there you go, guys. There's the thingamabob. Oh god, help me out here. What?
It's the keystone.
Thank you. Yeah, it's the keystone. I was just like, the materia. I was like, no, it's not the materia. When he gave the keystone back to the Turks, and there's those lines afterwards, and he goes into, it's the first time I think at least in the recording where I was allowed to sort of discover a slightly different side of Cait, one that was disappointed or one that was gutted. You know, when he says, for a moment there I thought we could be friends. And I think there's an honesty in that, and then it allowed, I think it was the first time that he was allowed to drop his guard.
Yeah.
Or something that sounded very sincere, very honest, and there was no one else to talk to. And I think that was the thing. There was no one. He says that line to himself, and so I remember after that, a lot of it, you know, it allowed me to think, well, for all that he has this sort of like bizarre, crazy energy, you think, well, some of it, I wonder if some of that is a front for, you know, for whatever reason, because he has this moment where he talks to himself and he feels an emotion by himself, and then it happens later on, you know, when he's in the Temple of Ancients, and you know, even when he's joking to himself, or he's just trying to letting them all go. The moments where he says something to himself allowed me to sort of recontextualize things, or at least remind me of the aspect that he is. His performance often will have an agenda.
Yeah.
Now, it's not something to overthink,
right. Because he's present, like you said.
Because he's
very present.
Because he's exactly. But it did allow me to think, oh, he is, for all that I'm thinking, for all that it's very tempting to think of him as, you know, this one side of Reeve. Those moments where he speaks to himself those moments where he speaks to himself allows you to actually see him as his own whole entity, and you start to remember, oh yeah, for all that he's one part of Reeves, he's also he has to be a 3D thing within himself with lots of facets, and you see that more and more. He does get frightened by things. He does get scared by things. He does get, upset if someone calls him out or something. He has moments where he reacts, and so that was definitely one sort of defining moment when it sort of redefined how I was approaching the character, or just keeping in mind who was around him at the time when he was speaking and what state of mind he was in. Another, I would often come into the voice. I'd often come into the studio, and I would say I always remember the first lines we recorded, his introduction lines and stuff like that. And when he says, fortune teller extraordinaire, put it there, and those lines he says to Barrett and Cloud, and they were always very useful just to like refine that energy, because there was times when maybe I'd be tempted to bring the energy down, and Kirk would say, keep it up here, or just keep it up at this level. But also at the same time, because you listen to the Japanese first, I'm sure this is not news to a lot of your listeners, but the way Final Fantasy is recorded is that all of the English speaking actors are matching their dialogue to the wavelength and time of the Japanese voices. So you'll listen to the Japanese voices once or twice to try and get in your head how many seconds it will take or down to the millisecond, how long it'll take the English to speak, and then you'll give it a go. The thing with Cait is that the performance, the Japanese performance in that can go really heightened, and it's just a stylistic sort of Japanese performance thing where you listen to some of the Japanese performance, and it's great, but boy is it energetic.
Yeah,
and so there was times
way up here,
way up at times, and so there was times when you just needed to make sure that you didn't get too taken astray with that level. So for all there was times when Kirk was like, keep it up here, there was plenty of times when he was like, no, bring it down. Let's not stretch for the Japanese here. There's no need. We're playing let's stay more grounded than that.
Yeah. And it was but it was still theatrical, and it needed to be, but yeah, that I think that's part of the magic of why I'm trying to be delicate, why your performance resonated so much with people, is that there is a 1% threshold between theatrical and grading, and you never made it to grading, which is really expert.
Well, thank you. I'm delighted, because bear in mind that was definitely a concern, where I think I hope the last thing you want is the character to just come across as annoying. I think knowing that he was the divisive character in the first place, like, okay, the one thing I just don't want him to be, he can be funny, he can be jarring in lots of ways, he can be irritating to the other characters, but at no point does he want to get too wearing on the player. And I think that was always something that was kind of in the back of my head.
Yes.
What you were saying about Barrett's line in mimicking me or ripping the piss out of me. Yeah, I had no idea that was in there. And as you said before, I recorded all of the stuff. I recorded it all in Glasgow. I recorded it in a studio in Glasgow. My callbacks were in a studio in the UK, and it was only when I went to LA 6 months into recording to see friends, and I thought I would pop in to say hello and actually meet people, like put face to a name with Justin, our engineer, and Kirk, the director, and anyone I could. That was when I saw people for the first time, and that was when I started to meet other actors coming in and out of the session. So I met Cody briefly, I met Brianna briefly, but I thought I was going to be helping them out, because I thought, well, I'm in LA now, I can hopefully record in LA and we don't have to do this horrific time difference, which was like 6 a.m. for LA, right. 2 p.m. for me, and about 11 p.m. for Japan, where Ryan and Ben were, the localization team, the translators. And But the producer was like, you can't record here because you don't have the paperwork. You don't have the working visa
Right.
paperwork, and it's going to be an absolute nightmare. So as much as it's lovely to
Yeah.
see you, could you get back over the
Could
pond
you
so we
get the fuck back? Yeah.
could you fuck off back to Scotland so we can carry on recording?
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you got to meet them.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we've become good friends now. I've seen them quite a bit now, so yeah, they're lovely. The whole team's great.
The team is great.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you met some of the other performers. Bree and Cody, obviously, fantastic people. I think, and you had mentioned you've met John.
I've met John. Yeah,
Yeah.
I met John at a couple of events, and now we've become good friends. And,
Yeah.
and Caleb, who plays Zach. So
Yeah.
I met him when I was last out in California as well. So
Class
yeah,
act.
slowly but surely. Yeah.
Yeah. Absolute class act.
Yeah.
Theatrical. So one of the standout scenes for me was Loveless.
Oh yeah.
Now, granted, I was freaking out just because Loveless was the play, and that's a big deal to like super lore nerds.
Yeah.
And there's a J-pop star involved. It's a whole thing, but there's that had probably like a deceptive amount of dialogue because you actually have dialogue trees that happen there. But that was like your dialogue. I'm not sure if you were told, hey, this dialogue has a ton of actual weight prophetically for the way that things are. But the tone that you had, the tone that you had was like, it was very Shakespearean. Like you had that really like, it was theatrical and it was up here. And some of it was entertaining, but then there was like this somber undertone that really came across well. And that's something you just never expected from Cait Sith's character in this game at all. I never in a million years would have thought that we'd be getting like this kind of sublime exploration of like all of the primary themes of the game coming through your narration of a play. Can you explain some of your experiences doing that play?
Yeah, it was, I mean, that took a long time to record. I remember that was I don't know how many hours we must have spent on that, but that sticks in my mind of being on that play for a long time. And because there was lots of lines, but then B, it kind of jumps around in mood so much, and you're wanting to make sure that it all actually flows, as if, because for anyone who doesn't know, you're recording the lines in quite short, succinct fashion, so you might just record a sentence at a time, because as soon as you start getting into longer sentences, it's much harder to keep it timed with the Japanese. So task one was kind of making sure you're always finishing a sentence, looking at what you're going to say next, just to make sure you can bounce onto it in a way that doesn't sound too jarring. And I remember being told, Ryan would say, right, so we're doing this big play scene, and we sort of talked a little bit about it. I didn't appreciate like half the lore that was in it, the weight of which I do now, but as far as the context, it's like we're performing a play. And I do remember thinking that it's not to try and fall into the trap of doing it, of suddenly taking 2 steps back from the mic and playing it as if I was in a massive sort of audience, because although that could work, a lot of the you're watching it from quite a close-up angle. A lot of the shots of that are are close-ups of Cait, and I don't think the player necessarily feels like they want to be in the back row of this performance,
right?
In a Broadway show. They want to actually, especially for the people that know the story and see how this is coming about, it wants to feel more intimate. So I remember thinking, and I think we chatted about that at the time, of kind of actually almost going against the instinct of performing the play. Like, he is performing the play and he's having fun with it, and we were saying, like, yeah, he's kind of taking on another character of sort of, again, he's in performance mode. He definitely is in performance mode, but not getting so carried away with it that it just becomes a one level banana.
Yeah.
Here we are, so relentlessly for 10 minutes we're going to shout at you, while this play gets performed, which I think it would have killed it stone dead.
It did. It felt like it split the line between, very performative, like a separate layer of performance, like, the meta layer of performance, and intimate. It did feel intimate too.
Yeah, I think part of that's because you're seeing some of the other characters take on those personas as well. So there's like that funny. There's a tongue-in-cheek element of, let's say, seeing the characters dressed up in different outfits, but then there's something underneath it which still seems quite, especially in Cloud's body language in particular. Some of those shots, there's something coming through. You're like, oh, there is actually quite a dark or serious undertone there. But yeah, it took a long time to record, and some of the stuff we had a bit of visual for. So there was times when I'd try and match up some dialogue to, let's say, an arm movement and stuff like that, but a lot of it was just going off the audio. But it's interesting when you watch this stuff back now. I know that some of the other actors will find this as well, that you can't help but hear yourself, and there will always be a part of your brain that's thinking, man, I wish I'd maybe made another choice. But I think it's because you're seeing it in the context of everything else around, and there's always a part of you that's going to be critical for something. But in fairness to the team, the development and everyone put this together, I think it's remarkable how coherent everything flows, considering everyone is doing this individually.
Sure. Yeah.
It's kind of, what a feat.
Yeah, I don't think, it's obviously natural to be in that position of nitpicking yourself, but from an observer perspective, I can't think of a single miss. Like, I can't sing. But, you're in the first person view. You're like, oh, I could have done it this way. I can't even fathom how else you would do it. Do you have a favorite scene that you did?
A favorite scene, I think that one with the Turks, I think, was one of them, just because I was allowed to sort of have a bit of showing a slightly different range. In terms of watching how something came out, I don't remember recording it at the time, but I was really happy with how the Temple of Ancients scene came out. I mean, just as a whole thing, just as the spectacle around it, all the cuts, the shots of things crumbling, and I've never felt so emotionally attached to a Moogle in all my life, which is possibly a sentence I never thought I'd hear myself say. But I think there was something they managed to capture in the physicality of the Moogle in holding up, and before everything comes crumbling down, which I was really, when I watched that back, I thought, man, they've done such an amazing job there. And it was not that I was thinking, I nailed that, but it was just it was a scene I felt really, really proud to be in. Yeah. And it was the music around it, the atmosphere around it, and as I say, that moment when you just see the Moogle's arm sort of just stretch out as things are at the very last moments. It was a scene I was really, really proud to be a part of. And in terms of recording, there's lots. I remember a lot from the start, and weirdly, a scene that I remember doing, and I think I pulled back on a lot, or I drew back on a lot in terms of just keeping his character and his voice, was when they're not too long after the sandstorms come and whipped everyone up, and he gives the reading. The team, the full parties, the party's pretty much there. It's before they've jumped in the car, and there's an image which has actually been used a lot for Square's marketing. You know, there's a blue sky, and he says, "You should get yourself a reading." I've forgotten the first half the line now. When you don't know where life's leading, you should get yourself a reading.
There you go.
Yeah, finally got there in the end. And I think I remember recording those. It was just fun, and I think it's because there's a really it's a playful,
line. Yeah.
Fun time, you know, and everyone seems to have been in a light moment. It's not too tense, and it was a useful one to sort of draw on for a lot of the time when Cait is just in that playful mood. Yeah.
Do you do anything like anything physicality wise to get like, I don't, you know, don't feel pressure, but could you do Cait Sith right now?
Yeah, a lot of I move my arms a lot, and I think that I knew he was quite an animated character, and in some ways, you know, he's almost he comes across like he's got the energy of almost like a kid's toy, you know, at times, and he has got this boisterous energy. And so there was times I had to do a take again because I'd accidentally like hit the mic with my arm. Like, well, that's that one fucked. You know, I think just through the cans they would hear and obviously they can't see what's just happened, but sorry Kirk, I accidentally just like completely knocked the mic out of the way. Give us 2 seconds. But you know, it's like, you would think that sort of voice actor 101 sort of know where you are to the mic, but sometimes you just kind of get a bit carried away. So a lot of it, there would be times when I would just gesture a lot, I think, and be like, I don't know, sort of like just like pointing, like, all right guys, come on, let's go over here, no, come on guys, and sort of really try and just because you can't move back and forward a lot, and it's not as if you can start doing somersaults around the room, so you've got to stay fairly there. But I did try to use my upper body as much as possible just to kind of keep him going,
right, and match the rhythm. Yeah.
And because there's not much stillness in the character a lot of the time, and even when he is still, his voice seems as if it's bouncing around a lot of the time. So and in the fight scenes, you know, if you're doing the like fight lines and stuff, I would be sort of a lot of this, and just sort of like, you know, like, guys, come on, no, Cloud, a guy with a gun in his arm, let's go, guys, I'll follow this way, let's go.
There's a ton of fight dialogue, huh?
Yeah. And sometimes that gets exhausting.
Would you do fight dialogue in phases, or would you get it all like out of the way, where you're just like you get to this energy level and then you just do all your fight dialogue, or was it staged as as everything progressed?
It came and went. You know, there would be times when, I mean, we recorded what scenes were ready to be recorded, and so, but then there would be times when it would just be a solid 4 hours of recording fight dialogue. Which fight dialogue can be quite fun. What does get grueling is just doing fight noises and fight impacts, and I would look at a full spreadsheet of like punch or being hit, good health, being hit, medium, good health, being hit, really, really struck, and so you had to break all of these down, and so you have to find 10 different ways of taking a blow that sound that don't sound like one another, you know, 10 distinct ways of taking a blow, and then do that with more intensity, and then do that when you're near death's door. So, and then throwing punches. So those could get into long days because you're not using your brain in the same way. You know, at least when you're doing the dialogue, I'm constantly just thinking of the next way I could say a line, or another way I could say the line, and it moves quite fast. So, you know, with they're listening to one line and I'm already looking at the next, thinking what's 3 different intentions I could put behind that line to break it up. But when you're doing just fight noises or box throwing noises or Everyone's favorite scene. So everyone's favorite part of the game, flinging boxes around for.
Yeah, I appreciate your self-awareness there. I honestly, I didn't have an issue with it, and I hear that you got it on the first time. That's what
I got one in my first time, but that's definitely, as you know, it felt very Cait-like to have some beginner's luck there, which went rapid.
Okay, I
only lasts so long.
I have to ask. Okay, so it's almost like it's a staple of Final Fantasy voice actors to hum the victory theme, and
Man, I cannot remember.
and there's it's a competition, and I gotta say, John Eric Bentley was like on top, and then this game came out, and we get your version. Can you do that now?
Well, no, because this is the one that always goes out in my head because I always get mixed up with my own theme with it. What are the?
Because you go meow 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 meow.
Oh
yeah. Which
'cause I always
did.
do. I always do the other one, which is like the theme tune. He sings the theme tune sometimes. That's always the one that's ingrained in my head.
I like that you so effortlessly won this competition you didn't even know you were a part of. That you can't even remember. You're just like, no, I'm just that good. I just
To go back and tell
I
John
phoned
that.
in a winning performance.
Thanks very much.
You had
does it in his face.
You had the comic timing was really good. A lot of times with the like some of the combat language, like I'll knock your block off, and the leg day line is obviously it's a staple.
Yeah. There was a few fun ones in there. Go on.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. You're gonna have to do a ton of fun character. I mean, you're the fun character, and but I do see that the way that and we've talked about this already a lot in this discussion already, is that even though originally the character was complex, it's still really the re-trilogy recontextualized the character to be so much more than comic relief, like so much more. And so much so that there's that fear that you're going to lose some of the humor and some of the tension breaking. Rebirth does have a lot of tension breaking already because of just like its scale and stuff like that. But there was a lot of your dialogue was just pure. It was just pure and childlike and fun, and some of it was sarcastic and witty, and some of it was goofy. But I would say that if you were to take like a characterization of what people on the outside would think your character was going to be like based on on appearance alone, they would say that it's 90% comic relief and then maybe 10% tragedy. But the reality was, I would say, like, much closer to like 60-40. Even though you're very present all the time, 40% of your dialogue was like meant to be informative, or it was serious enough in the moment, still had the gleam of who, the comic silliness of the character. There's a bit of dialogue that really kind of stood out to me, and it was actually like kind of your final conversation with Cloud, your apology to Cloud. I'm not sure how well you remember that line, but you say, I already apologized to everybody else, but you say it's the same. I would rather they got hurt than you. And and there's something so sincere about that line. It kind of stuck out. How well do you remember?
Again, I remember. Again, I don't remember. You probably know the line more than me now. It was a while since I recorded it, but again, it was. I tend to remember the moments where I was allowed to kind of be honest and be sincere, and because I think you're right, he does offer more than comic relief for a lot of the game, and maybe that's just a lot of that is because he's involved more in various aspects.
Yeah.
There's an opportunity to show different sides of him. But I mean, I kind of had to often remind myself that he, for all that I necessarily didn't want him just to be comic relief, I needed to make sure that I still did go there with that, because there aren't a lot of, because a lot of the other characters go into a heavy place at certain times quite quickly, and so it's important. It's important to think, oh no, a part of my role within this game is to offer a different energy that other people or other characters aren't and cannot bring. You know, like you can't find that energy from Aerith, you can't find the same sort of energy from Aerith, you can't find that energy from Barrett, Cloud, forget it. You know, so he has to play. It's no use if everyone's sitting on the same level. And as much as I would maybe love to try and get into a deeper side, you need to remember, like, oh no, yeah, that's Reeve. Like, and you get those scenes from Reeve, and so allow yourself just to go there and embrace the fact that you're there to kind of keep everyone's energies up, and that your energy sits in a very, very different plane from everyone else, and that's fine. But when he does have those moments with Cloud, similarly to when he's with the Turks, it was nice to record, just because it's stripped back, it's honest, and he's, again, because I think that he's got, I don't think it's used. There's a lot of conversation that goes around. Probably going to jump in a different conversation here, but there's a lot of conversation that obviously goes around how much autonomy or sentience he's got, or an aspect of a soul that he's got, and I like to think that he does. For all that he might be controlled by Reeve to a lot of the time, I think there's signs that he does have some of his own autonomy, and I think he has. I like to think he's got the ability to feel. Apart from anything else, I don't think it's a particularly interesting thing to play as an actor if he doesn't.
Sure, yeah.
But also, like if you take the Temple for Ancients, for example, for all that he comes back and he might know that, you know, he was going to come back, I do wonder the way he's, you know, he even says those lines, well, it was fun while it lasted, or whatever he says, it was a good run while it lasted. And I think at that moment, for all that he might have some inkling that he might be able to regenerate, I don't know if he can be completely sure that he will. And so maybe in that moment he thinks this could be my last roll of the dice, and I don't know if I could roll a 6 or I could roll a 1, and only time's gonna tell. And you know, even coming into the thoughts of Inspire, I mean, this seems to be an incredible ability that Reeve seems to have, but in terms, if we take what so much of this game is about, in terms of the aspects of the game which seem to suggest, you know, everything is connected, the life stream, if we take the themes of the life stream into consideration, the fact that Reeve has this ability to essentially breathe life into inanimate objects, if we were to follow the logic that everything is connected and that the life stream is part of that everything down to the atomic particles and atomic being has a place and is connected somehow, as soon as you put some of these things together and that atomic being is generated and is created, which essentially, as far as I'm concerned, is the logic of Inspire, once that happens, then you have breathed life into something. It's something I think is akin to if you watch Blade Runner, for example, and this thing of, you think you're just dealing with robotics, but as soon as you put these things together and you've messed around with nature, you have created something that's got some sort of at least feeling. Whether you want to define it as a soul or not, I don't know, but you know, you've created something that's got the ability to feel because you've put the atomic matter of the life stream into it.
The nature of consciousness is a massive topic.
And no so much so in Rebirth as well. It's opened up into a whole new playing field, you know.
So that's really such an interesting way. Okay. Most of my viewers are deep lore people, and but even amongst the hardcore fandom, Inspire is a very obscure piece of lore. And
Yeah, yeah,
for a
yeah.
little bit of a background on Inspire, um, it is an ability that Reeve specifically has. I think a lot of people just have this idea that Reeve was putting on like a VR headset and then like controlling Cait Sith with joysticks, but we learn that it's really not it's not that. And some of it feels like maybe it was a Deus Ex Machina to explain how Reeve is able to do things while Cait Sith exists. But Nojima actually created lore around it and said that it's something kind of it's an ability that Reeve has, and it might be an ability that is present in the world system of Final Fantasy VII. Like, you'll notice, for instance, when you first get to the Gold Saucer, Dio and Cloud are lifted up on these pedestals. They don't have any controllers. They don't have anything attached to their body, but they can seemingly control these, robot jockeys. And it's sort of like this idea that humanity or sentient beings in the world system have some kind of direct willful control over their surroundings, and Reeve's ability to do so is very strong and specific to him, and it is described as being able to breathe life into inanimate objects. He was, as a child, able to cause a Mako reactor to power up on its own, and that's why the president grabbed him. But the way that I've always conceptualized the character, even with that knowledge, is that what we're getting to see is that Reeve is kind of, I think, like, on some level, Reeve's relationship with Cait Sith is similar to Clark Kent and Superman, and that Cait Sith is Superman, Cait Sith is Kal-El, Cait Sith is the real Reeve, right? And that and that he's in a lot of ways unfiltered. In a lot of ways, he has the most agency to do his own unfettered moral behavior. He speaks the way that his parents did, like his upbringing did, and that the glasses come on, and that's Reeve. There's like that kind of dynamic. But you do bring up that point that so much of the way that Cait Sith is portrayed, particularly in the scene at the Temple of the Ancients, is that there is this sort of independent sentience to this being, and there is that little question. It's like, what's the transporter conundrum. I'm not sure if anybody's familiar with Star Trek. I'm sure there's people familiar with Star Trek.
Sure, there's one or two.
there was this idea brought up in Star Trek in one of the episodes. I'm not enough of an expert to really know, but it came up in a lot of the philosophy classes I was told to teach, and it was that the transport problem, the transport conundrum, is that because your matter is just being beamed to another location and rearranged, is it just an exact copy of you that's being reborn, and then did the old you just die? Can you really point to an actual chain of conscious memory? And they came up with some Deus Ex or something to explain why that is, but you get that feeling from Cait Sith under that, and you really breathe life into that. That's why it's so tragic, is even as somebody who played the OG and knew that Cait Sith's second body was right around the corner, that hits like a truck. And it's because you're breathing life into this character that really does have a genuine mortal fear in the moment, you know?
And yeah, and I think again, it doesn't. I think from a playing perspective, and I can't even remember if I properly knew where we even were in the story. But from a playing perspective, it doesn't. I don't think it doesn't make it any more interesting to think, yeah, we're going to play this, but you know, I know
Yeah.
in 5 minutes later I'm going to come back. But again, I think everything that Cait feels
Hmm.
is obviously goes through Reeve
Hmm.
somewhere in Reeve's body. You know, even if Cait regenerates, he's regenerated through the emotional state to a greater or lesser extent
Hmm.
of Reeve. At least that's kind of how I see it. You know, every time you see Cait, there is something in Reeve there, and you're seeing an emotion that Reeve contains.
Yeah.
Whether he's displaying that at that moment in time is a different matter, but Reeve at least has the propensity to feel the same.
Right. But they
And
also act independently at the same time. So,
sure,
yeah. Yeah.
sure. So I think you could say, yeah, they're one and the same thing, but at the end of the day, you know, if maybe it'd be an interesting thing to say, if the last, for whatever reason, if the last Cait died, if that's something that can happen, then there's a good chance that a part of Reeve would die with it,
Oof.
and
Oh, man.
and which is an interesting
That's heavy
concept
as
to play
shit.
with, and to play with as well, in the sense that I don't know, but I think it's a fun thing to think that even if there's going to be a regeneration, even Reeve, again, as certain as he can be, every choice that Reeve makes, just like everyone, but every choice that Reeve make, he is ultimately, excuse the pun, rolling the dice
Yeah.
on the fact that that Cait will come back, or that Cait will actually do what he's meant to do, or that Cait will, you know, the works that inspire still work, so that there's always an element of chance in there. It can't be a complete certainty. At least I think with the nature of Cait, I think that's kind of again what we come down to. He lives and dies on chance.
Yeah.
You know, the fortunes only exist with chance. If you wanted to go into his backstory in the folklore, there's a lot to do with uh, the nature of luck in the I think in the mythology that you could probably pick apart as well. But sticking with the game, it's I think yeah he lives and dies on chance.
He does. And I do want to get into that. So, how much about the folklore are you familiar with that you could present
um,
to the audience?
there's more so than I was aware of, but before I met MJ Gallagher, who if I do this I do this often, but if anyone is really interested in mythology and folklore, then as I'm sure you testify, go out and get his books. Especially now, if you read the I think the Greek one,
Hmm.
there's big keep in mind that was written before Rebirth came out, and I think there's a lot of things that he seems to have predicted pretty accurately. Anyway, yeah, the lore. I mean, well, okay, so if we're going to go with the lore, then we may as well open up the discussion of his name as well. Uh, give the people
Yes.
what they want. I mean, I look at the time when I got the part, I wasn't looking too heavily into what the past of the character was, and
Hmm.
he'd always the conversations I'd had with the producers and anyone that I'd had a conversation with had always pronounced it as Cait Sith. So it was really only after the fact that I was kind of like hearing the discussion rear its head again. However, even if I was totally aware of it at the time, I would probably not be going in on day one. Go to the producers and the director saying, before we start, can we discuss this? Because as much as I understand the arguments on both sides of it, I think the developers and everyone around this game have spent so much time thinking about so much of this. I believe that there was whether it was an honest mistake back in the day, like, and or someone hadn't thought of where it came from. I don't know, but I appreciate the fact that there's been a lot of thought and decision gone into it, and so the choice to keep it as Cait Sith, I think, is completely fair, as opposed to Cat She, which even, and this is a funny thing, I see a lot of people kind of arguing about it, and most of whom I'm sure aren't necessarily particularly well versed in Gaelic, and I'm not a Gaelic speaker. I've had conversations with friends of mine who are, and we've kind of looked at the etymology and the derivation of the words. And so for anyone that, the weird thing is the way it's written, actually, like the spelling of the name that we've got now, even if you were to translate it into Gaelic, it's not necessarily grammatically correct. And
Interesting.
in the spelling, if I was to show that to one of my Gaelic speaking friends, they would look at it and say, one person looked at it and was like, geese cats, taking it completely out of context. But that's just more of a grammatical thing. But so to clear up pronunciation confusion, the way it's spelled, the C-A-I-T, it actually ends up being the plural form of the word cat, which ends up being pronounced closer to something like ketch. So that as we see it, the pronunciation of that runs more closer to ketshi or ketshia, depending on which part of Scotland you might be speaking Gaelic. So, but that would translate into the plural of that, the cats. So if we were to be
even more specific in singular,
exactly. In singular, it would just be cat, and in Gaelic, you tend to just have a slightly softer T. It's a T that sort of lands kind of. Some people say cot. I think that's just a regional thing of where you might be speaking Gaelic from. All of my friends that have looked at that, I'd say cat she. So that's the Gaelic derivation. I think, and the other thing is, because I don't like anyone sort of like really, really falling out and arguing over this to the point that there's like horrible discourse over Twitter. But
unavoidable.
But the thing is, unavoidable, especially with Final Fantasy VII. I've come to learn. The thing about Gaelic is, now this might seem like a cop out to some people, and that's totally fair enough. But this is the sword that I've decided to live and die on. I think there is a world in which you can have both. Partly because of the logic of the fact that in Gaelic, there are lots of instances where you can have a Gaelic pronunciation for a name and an anglicised version of a name that sound different. So, for example, where we get the name Ian from, at least in Scotland, if you were to pronounce that in Gaelic, it's something similar to like Nyan, but that actually translates into John. So I've got a friend whose dad is actually called Nyan, closer to something like Ian, but if he was speaking to his English-speaking friends, he would introduce himself as John. I thought, was it Norman? I think Norman's another one. Norman, an English name, and you look at that in Gaelic, it's like Tormod or something similar to that. So they're very, very different. So I do believe there's a world in which he introduces himself as Cait Sith. If some other being was to come along and start speaking Gaelic to him, he might completely code switch.
I don't think it's out so bad. I would love that.
I mean, it would definitely give me something to think about. It was giving me a task if I was in the recording studio and that happened. But I don't think it's it's definitely not without the realms of, or out with the realms of Reeve to have his robots programmed with different language abilities, I'm sure. So I genuinely think there's a world in which you have both, and there's an English version for the name, or an English-speaking version of the name, and something that he would have if someone was to come and speak a different language. That's how I kind of like to see it. Regardless of your slight tangent here, but regardless of your opinions on it, what I don't have any time for is the abuse of the localization team seem to get, and the trolling, any trolling that the localization team seems to get for their interpretations of how they've done what they've done to the Japanese, or the way they've translated it, because I think they've done an absolutely cracking
It's a
job.
phenomenal localization. It's
Yeah.
and yeah, I'll put that out there too, and completely echo that sentiment. There are times when knowing, you know, the direct Japanese translation will help people that are trying to do deep lore dives get an additional piece of context. But also, sometimes localization helps us get other parts of the context that the Japanese direct translations wouldn't have sussed out for us, because these everybody talks really well, and there's probably no better game localization than the localizations in Final Fantasy. The last 4 mainline Final Fantasies have been really set the standard for localization.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry if it doesn't paint whatever fictional thing that you have staked your entire identity on in the most favorable light, but to say that is a reflection on the absurd task of localizing not thousands, not tens of thousands, but sometimes 100,000 lines of dialogue, sometimes hundreds of thousands of lines of dialogue. Zero tolerance for any of that here too.
No. And I've had, as I've said before, I said earlier in the chat, there are lines that we've made specifically Scottish, which are definitely not like direct translations, but of anything the Japanese is saying, but they will be giving the tone across, and they decided to make it in such a way that would have a shout out to people in Scotland that will hear phrases that not necessarily everyone hears. And I've had messages on social media of people being delighted of hearing phrases that they never once thought in a million years they would hear in a video game, let alone one of the biggest video games on the planet. But so anyway, that's my take. That's my take on the name,
on the pronunciation.
On the pronunciation. The folklore, I mean, there's so many different strands to it. There's, I think, slightly inaccurately, and again, anyone that really wants to know this detail for detail should drop a line to MJ on Twitter, and I'm sure he'll give time to reply. I've thrown him in it now, but I think sometimes it's slightly misunderstood that the character has come from something that translates into the fairy cats, this Highland fairy cat, which isn't completely accurate. I think it's more akin to this mythological lore where there were these types of cats that would steal the souls of or that would be soul robbing, I think, from fairy mounds. I think that's closer to it. I can probably hear him just shaking his head right now, like, dear God, he's butchering my life's work.
No,
and but they would go, so there's like these fairy mounds and mounds that exist where people would be buried. And so I think there's something very, very interesting in Rebirth, is that, taking this in mind, if we take the notion that there used to be these cats that went and basically robbed souls from essentially graveyards, it's no surprise that the first time we actually meet Cait in this game, we find him, or when Barrett and Cloud find him, it's in a graveyard. And I think MJ would suggest that that's definitely a nod to that aspect of the lore and the relationship that the cats have to death and to souls. And so there's loads. I think there's a really, really interesting I think in Norse mythology, if we look at the god Freya, who I think is again connected into death, and I think is basically a gateway to the underworld. I think her mode of transport was essentially a chariot of cats.
Mm-hmm.
And so you find a lot of you find a lot of these. There's a load of links. The fact that he's got a megaphone connects back into a piece of Norse mythology. The chosen weapon of Ragnarok, I think it is.
Yeah,
Again, I'm really cherry picking things.
He's got the Gjallarhorn, which is like his ultimate weapon, and and Freya, yeah, the cat thing too. She's also she's kind of the practitioner of satyr magic, and that's
right.
Connection to fortune telling. Yeah, definitely.
Yes. Yeah. And I mean, I think if you look back in history, there are various different cultures have a different relationship with cats, and I think this has changed throughout the centuries. And in some cultures, they are seen as good luck. In some cultures, they're seen as bad luck.
Sometimes on the same island.
And then sometimes the same island. Yeah. And so I don't think there's probably a lot in that, in the fact that he represents both. He represents both good luck and bad luck, and again, that comes and links back into this whole element of chance. There's also a story, which I can't now really remember, but it's the King of Cats story, where essentially it's regaled these 9 cats. Someone spies these 9 cats walking around with a coffin with a crown on it, and I think the King of Cats was essentially died, I think, and then another cat basically comes along and takes its place. So the thing is, even the hello.
Speaking of King of Cats, yeah.
King of the Cats, yeah, the King of Cats. Even the crown is not just a piece of random decoration, I don't think. When you look at all of the senses, look at all the aspects of lore that Final Fantasy seems to have delved into, it's by no means an accident, I don't think.
I don't either. I think they do a lot of stuff. A lot of it was, 25 years ago significant, and then now as they've had an opportunity to iterate on it over, years of lore building, and you take in the primary writer Nojima's love for all things mythology. It really does. It's hard to dismiss stories like that. And like you mentioned too with Black Cats, I think one of the things that I like a lot about and Final Fantasy is not the only game or bit of appropriative media that has taken the Kachi character and put it into its thing, but it is a positive representation of Black Cats, and the preponderance of witchcraft and that the panic around that did sort of paint Black Cats in this light that has led to a lot of animal cruelty and a lot of weird stuff that have happened. And so whenever you get positive representation, say, hey, this is it's more of a neutral fortune thing, it's also allowing cultures that have been and belief sets that have been largely oppressed, not to be or suppressed, not to be particularly controversial, but we've got we've got a Scotsman here, so I'm not gonna pretend it didn't happen.
The other thing, I think I'm right in saying you probably know more about this than I do in terms of in the Kachi history through the lore of the game. But am I right in saying that in which game is it? Is it the game is one of the Crisis games when earlier iterations of Cait are being developed, and it's the one where he falls apart. It's essentially it's the one where he's working with Cissnei a lot. Is that before Crisis?
Yes.
Yeah. And when he does fall apart, and there's three. Am I right in saying there's the three items of his mechanics that are brought back, or that they find from this fallen apart version of Cait is it's like an arm, a something, and the crown is the third piece. Right in saying that? Someone else can correct me on that. But I think there's something. There's like
you're dead on.
It's the crown is like one of the third piece that gets brought back, at least to Reeve or something like that, or it's the third piece that's found. And again, you think, well, why is the crown so significant?
So yeah. Well, yeah, the crown. I hadn't thought about it that way. But the crown being significant is really interesting. But yeah, so it's your the arms, the body, I'm pretty sure, and then the head. The head or crown is the third part.
Yeah.
And to be clear, like, nobody's played Before Crisis in this chat because we couldn't. It was like we've had to just like watch it through the the YouTubes and stuff. But I will say, you're probably the first VA in history to talk about it, like in a public setting. Like, that is deep lore. Before Crisis is deep lore. Yeah,
this is potted from conversations I've had with MG, and then random bits that sort of what
I really think
on YouTube, and sort of gathering parts of this together just to sort of like get an idea of his genesis.
I really think Square should make sure that all of the VAs become friends with MJ at this point. It's really it's doing wonders here for this conversation. Yeah. Well, so how early into the process, or was it entirely after, that you realized that there was a little bit of cultural weight on you to portray this character?
I think it was about, I would say over I managed to avoid it for a long time, actually, which I think in hindsight was lucky.
Yeah, because that's pressure. That's just pressure. Yeah. And again, it made a deliberate, as I said before, I made a deliberate choice not to go researching, which did come with its risk, because I was aware that I was kind of approaching a character in a way that I wouldn't normally do. I wasn't loading myself with all of this information, which I think actors a lot of the time can they use information and research as a kind of security shield to make you kind of feel like you're doing the right work, because you're afraid of just actually jumping into the deep end. Mm-hmm. Not to say that, like, there is research can have its place, but I just know that for me, I've fallen into the trap before of thinking, yeah, I'm doing all this research, so that's definitely going to help. And actually, a lot of it, you think, well, let it be known, Paul Tinto is taking huge shots at method actors. Okay.
Yeah. Not at all. But it's the kind of thing that, if someone was to have the conversation with me about, let's say if we would have a conversation about lore come day one, but like, oh, that's interesting. How, is that playable as an aspect right now when I'm, when I'm performing Loveless? Probably not. So it has its time and it has its place.
Sure.
But I'm glad but it was a risk for me to sort of like think, okay, I'm going to go in totally blind and just have the discussions with the director and the team, and let them guide me, and learn the story as I went. So I think, let's say I started recording in January. I want to say it wasn't until maybe, when did I start recording? I started recording January 20, what would it have been, 22? Yeah, January 22, and it was probably at least autumn into winter. Yeah, but let's say autumn 22 at least before I kind of went to my cousin saying, "Mate, I'm recording this. Do you know? Do you know Final Fantasy?" He was like, "Yeah." I'm recording this Final Fantasy game at the minute, and he was like, "What, Rebirth?" I was like, "Yeah, Rebirth. Do you know it?" And then he kind of made me aware. So I was probably, I would say, I was over halfway through, but I still had a good chunk to go. I mean, I recorded on and off. You know, you'd have months at a time when you were in, and then you would wait for ages, and then you'd go and do something or schedule. There was sometimes when a TV filming or schedule would clash, and so they would have to wait for me to become available again. So I'd say I recorded like a year and a quarter, but that's with gaps in between when you're waiting for new material to come through. It was definitely, I recorded at least half of it without the weight.
Yeah.
And I was good, I think, at the time. Once I did realize, I think I was happy carrying on the way I was going. Where the fear did set in was after the game was completely wrapped, and you know, there's nothing else that can be changed. You can't, anything you do is in the hands of the gods, so to speak.
Yeah.
And that's when, I have that with TV and filming as well. I will have a great time filming it. I'm loving being there and present. And then when you know that it's about to get subjected to the opinions of the many, that's what gives me the book. That's what, oh my god, oh, it's like, what have I done? Thinking back on all my choices.
Yo, yeah. Yeah, at that moment myself. Well, do you have, like, I know I've been shown pictures of you playing Rebirth, so I know that it does happen.
They do exist.
Do you have any favorite moments in the game that don't involve your character? And
I mean,
a follow-up topic to that too is, when you experience the game, how massively different did it feel compared to what your concept of it was like?
Hugely different, but I don't think it was different for the reasons I expected. I mean, to come back to your first question, I think, I mean, I've dipped in and out. I was lucky to go around to MJ basically said, "You need to come around and play some of this game," and so I did. So I'm yet to actually sit down with a PlayStation by myself and start from the start. I've watched a lot of people play. I've watched many hours of Max Hood going through it, Maximilian Hood, and I've watched a lot of scenes. So one of the scenes that sticks out to me, at least just from a performance point of view, is the whole sequence of Barrett and Dine. And when I watched that, and I need to actually drop John a message to say, just from a voice acting perspective, I thought just absolutely cracking, like absolutely smashed it out of the park. And so there's a few moments like that where you think, wow, just the performance there, they've absolutely nailed it.
Unbelievable.
And,
yeah, very emotive.
So emotive, and you know what? It's easy, I think, often. So to completely on the opposite side of that, because I think it's we often remember the really, really emotional aspects of it, and that though is incredible. That scene is, even watching someone else play it, once that becomes a showdown between Dine and Barrett. Even from a game playing perspective, even if you're watching someone play it, it still feels emotional. The setup of the scenes on either end of the setup of the scene that leads into it to then you fighting, it's I remember thinking, man, I'm not even playing this. It's not even me holding the controller, and it's not even just watching someone else do that fight and defeat Dine. For some reason, it was like, wow. This is the music behind it was incredible.
It's really, it's an elevated form of storytelling, and it's easy to get disconnected from it for a while because I like, life is busy and these are games and they're escapes. I I remember like leaving the scene for a while and then coming back and going, oh, yeah, this is as serious as it gets in terms of telling a story. You know.
Yeah, incredibly so, and it doesn't even come. You know, it's not like it comes that late. It's not as if it's coming in the last. You know, often when you're playing games and you've left all of the emotional weight to the till the other end of the game and lead up to it. That's not necessarily the case in Final Fantasy. But then on the complete flip side of that, because I think it's always very easy to remember all the emotive stuff. The first time I saw a scene with Dio, I thought that performance was just incredible. The voice acting in it, the physicality, the character scenes. I think it's one of the things I do love about Final Fantasy. For all there's so much depth and seriousness about it, there's also a lot of fun, and I don't think they've not lost that. And some of the smaller characters that you don't necessarily follow through the entire way, like Dio, and like, oh my god, what's his name? The character that locks everyone up, so Cloud has to go and find Barret's.
Solemn Gus. Yeah.
Spellbinding performance, from a physicality point of view, from a motion capture point of view, from a voice actor point of view,
do you know Jonah Scott? Have you met him yet?
No, I'm not. And I need to reach out to him because just incredible. Yeah. Both of them. The guy that plays Dio is escaping me now as well. Those were two. Watching it through, those are two scenes that always stick with me. Those two character performances. I just think they're sublime, and they're not contained. I think a lot of the time we get hooked into the way of acting by acting at the mic that's the deep, low, resonant voices, because it seems more powerful, it seems more emotive, and then it's a real joy to watch actors that are really going at something quite large, like those characters do.
Do you? Yeah. I mean, I know you're not necessarily like a gamer, but do you? Are there any franchises of games or games that you do enjoy playing or have fond memories of?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I remember. It's funny when I think of my potted history of computer game playing. The first computer I ever played was an Amstrad. And because that was the hand-me-downs from my brothers, and like my older brothers had an Amstrad, so that's what I was playing for the first part of my life. So anyone that remembers playing Gauntlet or Roland in Time or the Indiana Jones on the Amstrad, putting floppy disk in and typing /run disk C, I hear you guys. And then I took a big jump from Amstrad, missed all the Nintendo stuff, and then came straight to the PlayStation. So PlayStation, Tekken. I loved Tekken, and I couldn't wait for the backstory scenes that would come at the end of completing a character in Tekken. Loved Tekken, loved Medal of Honor. Those were the two that really, really stick with me. There was a couple of sports games as well, and I love playing Colin McRae Rally. Shout out for any Scottish gamers out there. Colin McRae Rally. I also loved Colin McRae Rally, but definitely Tekken and Medal of Honor were two that really, really stuck with me. And I played Spyro, played Crash Bandicoot, played, what else was in the mix? Destruction Derby.
Does MJ know you played Spyro?
No, we've never actually talked about Spyro.
You don't want he's insufferable about it. He's such a Spyro elitist. I can't even handle it.
All right, okay. All right, I'll avoid
he's
that.
He's in chat. He just laughed.
But there was a question you asked before that though to do with the games that I did have I was going to answer for you. It was but I've forgotten what your question was now. You asked me if the scenes of the games, and then was it in playing the game that I saw things differently? I mean, I never thought I would experience that. I didn't know what it would feel like to play myself as a character. That's one thing that was incredible.
When you got the POV section in Nibelheim.
Yeah, and I said this in a tweet. as an actor, you remember first experiences of things. You often remember the first time you're on stage, your first audition, your first time on set, the first time you see something in the television that you were in. But I never thought in a million years, or I never knew what it would feel like, and I hadn't anticipated what it would feel like to actually sit and play yourself as a character. And it was one of the most surreal yet bizarrely emotional experiences I've ever had. It was really, really surreal, and it made me see the game. I mean, I loved the game. I loved being involved in the story, the community. It's been an absolute joy to be involved in it. But it was something that was really. I find it hard to put into words, because it was a sense of, I guess it was a sense of pride, but also just something that was. It was nothing I've ever felt before. It was unique.
Gotta be an existential mind fuck from that. It's gotta be. I mean, it sounds beautiful, but it's, yeah. It was
beautiful, but it was surreal in a really, really nice way, and it was very humbling, is what it was. I was like, wow, it's like I never thought, and it did take me back weirdly in a very Cait Sith like way. I was taken very back much to a childhood state, and in a way that was I'm so grateful for. I never knew that was a feeling that I would have, or I ever expected to have. But definitely playing the game has influenced my. Influenced how I see the game. Not that I would do anything differently, but it's been informative in a way that if I'm lucky enough to do any more of Cait, it's definitely playing the game now. I think you feel the scenes in a different rhythm.
Yeah.
Not that I think it was anything wrong in the way we did it before, but it's just it shapes it or makes it more rich, I think is what I'm trying to say. It becomes more rich as an experience, and that's not a bad thing. And to know how other people are experiencing the game is not a bad thing. So I'm glad I'm sitting down now with the controller in my hand. I'm like, okay, yeah, let's do this.
I mean, it sounds rewarding. It sounds really, it sounds like a way to see, like, share the feelings of joy that you're, putting into people during pretty, sometimes dark times, and it's an escape. It's also just art. It really influences the world a lot, and it's. To be able to share that experiences by also picking up a controller, knowing that, 3-ish million people around the world have already picked up that same controller with you.
Yeah, that's wild.
Yeah, and enjoy the experience. So we're gonna kind of switch it up to some audience questions now.
Sure, yeah.
And I've taken some here. What's my favorite piece of music in Rebirth? Okay, I will say regarding music and Rebirth and Cait Sith, the Gold Saucer is kind of your, it's the zone that a lot of people affiliate with you. I was amazed at how much music is in the Gold Saucer. Like,
I know.
Like,
I know.
and depending on who you go on a date with, the music changes, and it's super dynamic, and every zone has its own. Yeah, there's a. So as somebody that's like played a lot of Final Fantasy VII, I will admit that the theme song of the Gold Saucer can make you go insane if played on repeat. And so it was one of those sections that I was kind of worried about in that regard. And I will say, getting into that section, the way they were able to break up the monotony by, making this giant living place that reacts to different stuff that's happening was really It's just yeah,
Yeah, because you spent a long time in there, and
yeah,
if that was, and
yeah,
I can I can imagine the world back in
yeah.
sort of old school PlayStation days where you would just hear that over and over again, and you just be on that for hours. But yet the music, the music is incredible. I also remember the first time I had to try and sing Kate's theme tune. Really hard. It's the melody is deceptively complex to hit pitch to get on like not to get on proper pitch just to sing it sort of like off the cuff. So there was times when he would just sort of wander off singing it and stuff. And to get to actually, I think there's times when the notes are fairly wild, and that's fine because he's just pissing about. But
Yeah.
I remember doing it, and I was like, "Man, this is like this is quite a jazzy tune that's got a couple of notes in there that aren't necessarily the ones you would just sort of like think to land on
Right.
coming in cold."
um so I think that's the best we could answer that question.
Yeah.
Uh
Just to cut in, there's a lot of, cause anyone that's asking me anything about part three, I'll tell you I have no idea. Don't know what it's called. Your guess is as good as mine in terms of where Kate goes in the directions. You know, I know nothing. I know nothing at all. I'm sorry.
you know, and obviously that is a question that's fair to ask. Like,
Yeah, absolutely.
sure.
Yeah.
And so Stray Chocobo does ask, what aspects of Cait Sith's personality or character get highlighted in part 3? And all I can say is that or do you hope get highlighted in part 3? All I can say is that part 3 has this, has like one of the most quintessential moral dialogues between Barrett and Cait Sith. Because, you know, Barrett is like, he's almost opaque in his disdain for Shinra. You know, Avalanche is doing bombings, all sorts of stuff, and Avalanche wasn't as complex in the OG as it is now in the, you know, recontextualized trilogy and all the expanded lore. So he was like the sole voice in that game for Avalanche. And so to have him have this dialogue with Cait Sith, and Cait Sith actually, you know, kind of pushes back and says, you know, adds to the moral complexity of what Barrett's done by saying, you know, hey, what about all those people that died? And they have this kind of back and forth about that. So I'm really looking forward to Cait Sith's character in part 3 being able to put the re-trilogy spin on that discussion, the discussion of, you know, two people that are on opposing sides of this very, very thin line, you know, between, you know, a like corporatized, monolith, late stage capitalist kind of mentality and a early Republican, not like the party in the United States, get that out of your mind, the, you know, Republic of Junon type idea where there's these two kind of extremes on how, you know, to serve the people. And to see two people that have genuinely good hearts, you know, have a nuanced discussion about that. In the few lines in the OG, that conveyed a ton. And so to get an opportunity to see that exploration of the topic through maybe not just Barrett and Cait Sith's character, but Cait Sith as being kind of the representative of what it's like to be in the system. And you know, we get more expansion of Cait Sith's character in that with the WRO stuff and Dirge later, but Rebirth, or, you know, Afterbirth, that's part 3, I just spoiled it for you, is so getting to really let Cait Sith, you know, and by extension Reeve, explore, you know, now what, like we see this monolith starting to topple. how do the people that are inside of it, that have always wanted to do good, seize the reins, use that opportunity to still continuing to do good? And why I think that's so important is because the OG was really important to me in establishing a lot of my core beliefs about the way things work best. And so using the story as this think piece on what happens when these monoliths collapse, because we don't know what the future holds, but a lot of people feel like, hey, that's a real possibility in the near future, is that we see this, the later stages of late stage capitalism start to crumble institutions, and how do the people within those institutions, reform society out of that. So I really do want to see that. That's what I'm most looking forward to out of Cait Sith's character. That's a lot of pressure to put on a robotic cat, but
I know, but if there's one robotic cat that can do it, maybe Cait Sith's the one. I agree. I mean, I think I again, I have no idea what's being written, but I think it would be. I've wondered that it would be interesting to see what it would look like if Reeve does pull everyone back, or if everyone discovers how you discover that Cait is part of Reeve, or how the group discover that, and if that is a case of Reeve leading everyone back, so everyone watches him confess and get arrested, or for example, then what that would look like to Cait. And I have no idea.
Oh, that's so good. Oh, that could be such a good scene.
But yeah.
You listening, Nojima?
Your guess is as good as mine. Give me that one for free.
Here's a good question from Icefire and All Things Crazy. Were there any lines during the Rebirth sessions that caused you any issues? Like any lines or executions that were blooper worthy?
Blooper worthy. I mean, there was a fair few times when I would try and learn the line, I would thought I had the line. I would give it 3 takes, and then Kirk would say, "Yeah, can you have a look at that line and take out the and the and that you seem to have shoved in there or whatever." I would make up my own version of the line and not even realize that happened. That happened a fair few times. There was a couple. There was a line, which is still in, actually, and I think it's something similar. It's something really simple. It's like, I think it's like a fight line or something where he just goes like, "Ah, bugger." And I remember saying to the guys, considering obviously it was, it wasn't a swearing game, and there were times when we would try to think up an alternate line for some reason, and I would try and think what a Scottish person, or what it would sound like coming out of a Scottish mouth, and often it would just be, I don't know, have a lot of swearing in it, and Ryan would be like, "Yeah, well, we can't say that." But I remember saying there was that there was like, "Ah, bugger," and I did say to him, I was like, weirdly, like, I think bugger in for Scotland, at least as far as I'm concerned, has maybe a stronger. It's one of the few one of the few exceptions where it actually has a stronger connotation in Scotland than it might do in America.
Much greater. Yeah, much greater.
And I was like, oh wow. I was like, and so as far as I was concerned, in my head, I was thinking, so wait, you won't let me have, like, right there you cunt, but you're going to say, all right, bugger. In my head, that's what
I really wish they would have let you drop that. Oh man. Just drop the C-bomb. Yeah, I would love to see, like, in the big showdown, the big moral showdown between Barrett and Cait Sith. He just drops the the C-bomb. Yeah.
There were a couple of it. There was, so that weirdly, that's a line that stands out for bizarre reasons. I'm like, and they ended up keeping it in, and I did say, there was a couple of times when they had, I can't remember them now. There were a couple of times they had a Scottish line that was clearly so niche that I didn't know what it was, and then Ryan would say, "All right, yeah, let's take it out. If you don't know it, then let's take it out." I'm trying to think. That bugger line is the one that stays in my head for bizarre reasons out of the others. If anything else comes back into me, I'll chip back in.
Did you mentioned that you did have some input on some of the things that were said? Did you change anything and say, hey, we need to make this, we need to up the Scottishness of this?
Sometimes actually it was the opposite. I think we were always conscious of making sure the Scottish didn't go too far, and so
there was like a caricature.
There was times when we would maybe take out the odd I or the odd lassie. We'd keep them in there, but I made sure they were. I tried to make sure they were sparse, because I thought this is, at least for Scottish players, this is when it's going to. If they just keep hearing all these things that are so cliched, not that they're not used, and they are they're still used, but when you start overhearing them, that's when you start to hear like, nah, God. But there were times, now again, testament to the likes of Ryan and Ben, there are lines that I suggested and they took, but now I can't really remember which lines were theirs and which lines were mine. Which is a testament to their research.
That's teamwork right there. Lines. Yeah.
And I think there was I can't remember who had Gialdi. I think that one's still in there, maybe in a fight. If someone was to say Gialdi in Scottish, it basically means like, go on, give it your all, or sort of like put all your weight behind it. So there was that, at least that at one point that was a fight line. I'm not sure if it stayed in, or it might crop up at one point. There's probably that I'm sure there's maybe a few people who picked up on some things that I've forgotten about. God, man, put me on the spot now.
Well, you can think about it. The MJ is in chat letting us talk shit on him. And he asks if Paul could go back to when he was offered the gig, knowing what he does now, would he do anything different?
Not take the part, because I didn't think I was worthy enough. Run. No, I don't think. It's a really, really hard question. There's definitely. I think the better way of putting that question is, from my experience now, what do I hope to try and carry into Cait in the next game if I was allowed to do it again? Just in the way of like, the games made now, and even the things that I look at now, even as we said before, there's lines you pick up on. There's lines you pick up on where you think, oh man, should I have said that differently? But at the time, you make the choice, and then it's only when you and the director, whoever else is taking that choice as well, and it's only when you see it in the context of everything else that that you maybe make a different choice. And performance-wise, I think now going forward, I think I'll be a lot more relaxed about how clear the accent is. I think going into it, I was trying to always play a careful line with making sure that the accent felt as if it was true to me, whilst still being clear enough for an audience that was outside of Scotland, without it being so enunciated that it sounded fake to Scottish people.
That makes sense.
And again, that's I've always thought, along with making it too heightened and making it too cliche, that was always the other thing that that always stuck in my mind, where you're focused on the diction being good so everyone can understand it, but then at the same time, if you start to hear all of the diction, then it starts to sound false to your ear. And I think everyone, I've not had any feedback from anyone that seems to have struggled with the accent. And actually, I think the more you trust people with an accent, I think actually the ear tunes into it quicker than you think. And if you can let people go along with it, and that's fine, and it's grand, and it usually works. So I think if I was able to do it again, I would look forward to just kind of really relaxing into the accent, knowing that everyone has got their ear tuned in, everyone knows what they're expecting, and that'll be fine. performance-wise. Again, there are things that I would love to see Cait do, but I don't know if they were actually thinking back in it. Would I make those choices there in Rebirth? Probably not, because the choices are made for a reason then, and the way that character has been set up now will hopefully allow the character to breathe more. He doesn't have the same facade that he had in Rebirth going forward now, because everyone knows who he is and everyone knows what his deal is, and he's working in more of an honest place. But if I was to make those choices at the start of Rebirth, then it wouldn't have made any sense.
Yeah.
Long answer to a short question. But a tricky question.
It was a tricky question. You can expect that from him.
Yeah.
Cheers,
mate.
Egg with Feelings asks, what got you into acting? And did you consider another career as a child?
I originally wanted to work behind camera. I used to love watching. Remember when we had DVDs and we would get the bonus features?
Yeah.
And you'd watch the featurettes and stuff, and you'd watch like the camera behind the camera, and you'd see people setting up, and you'd see everyone action, clapperboard coming, whatever. I used to love watching those, and I always wanted to be in that world. I thought, it's like, wow, that looks so much fun, just being part of that world. But I never thought to myself I'd ever be an actor. And then I said that I must have been 13, 14. Said that to my mum, and she said, well, you got to start somewhere. You may as well go down to your junior drama club. This is on Arran. For such a small island, they had a really vibrant sort of amateur theatre scene. I'm very, very lucky.
Wow.
And she said, you may as well go down there and see if they've got any backstage work. And this is my junior drama club. And so I went down, but they weren't rehearsing a play at the time, so there was nothing to do but get involved in all of the on-stage games. And I sort of realised I wasn't afraid to sort of just get up on stage and make a tit of myself and just sort of get up and do it. And then when it came to casting the plays for the drama festival, once a year, all the villages would have their own drama group, and they would come together and they'd do these plays for a week, and you'd have a adjudicator that would come over and rate the plays and stuff. And so I got involved in that, started doing those plays, and then that led to doing school shows. And by the time I was 16, 17, I was thinking, maybe I want to audition for drama school and try this, which was a terrifying thought to my parents, not because they weren't supportive, but because they were like, what's a drama school, and does Paul actually have a chance?
Yeah,
is this a pipe dream or not? Which is a valid fear. They were really supportive, but my brothers and sister had gone to university and they knew that model. But here's me saying I want to do this drama school thing, and as I say, they were nothing but supportive, but there was also the fear and thinking,
of course,
it sounds like a precarious profession, is and all the rest of it. So that was my journey into acting, and from wanting to work backstage. And then I remember doing a show once. I was filming a BBC series, and we were filmed out in South Africa, and I came onto this set, and it was the first time I'd been on what felt like quite a big, it wasn't like a studio set, it was on location, but it was quite a big set, lots of just things going on. And I remember that it was that first time I'd had that feeling of being a kid, thinking that's where I wanted, my 14-year-old self wanted to be, walking onto this set with lots and lots of stuff going on. And I think it was probably the closest thing I've had.
You're in a DVD extra right now. Yeah.
And I think it was probably the closest thing I've actually had, like holding Cait Sith. Not that I knew that was something that a feeling that I necessarily wanted again, but I think that was probably the closest thing. Those are the two closest things to compare. I think that feeling of just your 14-year-old self, the same kid that held a PlayStation console, being like, whoa. Because it's
so
important.
Cool.
It's cool. So that was that. I think you're constantly just trying to hold on to. I think as an actor, you're constantly just trying to hold on to the feelings of still being able to play. I think that's half the battle.
That is half of it. Wow.
Find your childhood self in it.
Well said. Well said. Do you have a dream role? Like, sky's the limit.
It's the limit. I mean, Not to top on top, not to just talk on topic, but you know what? I never knew that the world of video games is something that would open up to me. But if I was to be able to, if I was to be able to incorporate this into the rest of my career, I would be an incredibly lucky and happy man. I'll tell you that for sure.
Does that seem like it's in the cards for you? I mean, not spoiling anything.
No, I know it's I'm not working on anything right now. I mean, and it's a strange one where I don't know if there's like, in some ways, at least in TV and film acting, there can seem like a progression ladder where you play a certain size of part and then you think you might go up from there. I don't really know what the nature of it is in terms of gaming or voiceover character work, if it really progresses the same way. But I know that as a working day, I absolutely love it, and I would love if this work continues for me. In terms of other aspects of my career, it's funny, if you'd asked me that question when I was 21, I would probably say, you want to work with Scorsese, and you want to work with these massive directors. Ken Loach was a director he's a British director, who I grew up watching a lot of films of. His films were always felt very real and dealt with social issues, and nothing Hollywood about them at all. Always incredibly moving. And don't get me wrong, if I was to work with either Ken Loach or Scorsese, I would not be saying no. But now it's not necessarily a dream role that I think about, but I spend a lot more time writing now than rather than just acting. And I think when I wake up now in the morning, I think about the things I'd like to create. The notion of actually, being part of creating a TV series or starring in and writing a film, not necessarily directing, but having more of a part in creating the entire thing. And I think that's kind of where my interest lies now. So if I was to be part of a successful TV series that I'd actually played a part in writing and creating and getting off the ground, that's kind of where my dream sits now, I think, alongside doing voice acting, hopefully, if I was to be able to do video games and characters in animated series.
Well,
what a lucky man I would be.
Well, if there's anybody listening that's got a wide range of roles available, I'm sure Paul Tinto could fill all of them. See, I'm looking through some questions here.
Just scanning through Mr. Blooper Reels, though.
Most people are just excited that you're here.
Thank you so much. I don't know if this person is on right now, but I noticed at the very, very start of the conversation, something Trooper, Stormtrooper, something, or I can't remember the title, but there was someone who's excited that I was seemed to be someone from Aaron, where I just when I caught the word come up in the chat, and so I have no idea who it is, but there's a good chance I probably know them.
You might know them, yeah.
I might know them, maybe, I don't know, but thank you so much, everyone, for all these lovely comments. And I want to say this here, is the community, for all that people say that I heard lots of chat about the Final Fantasy VII community being one that's like more tricky and divisive, and I just want to say that I've had nothing but an amazing, welcoming and heartwarming, open-armed welcome into this community. So I thank you all.
Absolutely. And
I feel very, very lucky, so thank you.
And so far, Cait Sith hasn't been thrown into any love triangles, so you're probably safe from most of the toxic discourse
that's what
possible. But as somebody that is really knee deep in this community, even those segments of the community are mostly good, and it's a really it's a passionate fandom, and one of the side effects of passion is sometimes you get into discourse, and discourse is discourse, but you're gonna find people from 14 years old to 50 years old that are in this fandom. It's really wide, and most of us are good eggs, and a lot of it just is really a testament to the fact that you're part of this project now, this legacy that has a theme centered around destigmatizing mental health conditions and being honest with yourself and letting the true version of yourself dictate the way that you progress in the world. A legacy of protecting the environment and being cognizant of the fact that this is the only planet we get, and that we should take care of it. So I'm glad that you feel as honored as you do to be part of the community and the legacy.
Absolutely.
And we and I speak for all of us, are incredibly honored to have you voicing such a immaculately complex character. That really kind of I think gets to secret angles of those core themes about what this game is about and the narrative is about. So with that, YouTube, thank you guys so much. I think we've run our time. Hopefully I'll have Paul on again. Maybe next time we'll throw in a little bit of zest. Maybe some other Scottish people might join. And with that, we'll say goodbye, YouTube.